and prediction for the German election. Let's get right into it. So, the current polling numbers from February show a big change. Here's the main talking points. We do see that there is not much change either direction in each of the parties' votes. What we're really going to be looking at is that 5% threshold. For reference, in the German elections, if you want to enter parliament, you either need 3 constituencies or 5% of a national vote, and reasonably it's quite unlikely someone gets 3 constituencies but doesn't get 5% of the national vote. It's a long story, but essentially Bundeswahlknecht, which was surging for a long time, has dipped below 5%, but not by much. So that does mean they probably won't get seats unless there's a polling error, they tick right back above, or they do win those 3 constituency seats. The left has had a big uptick in recent months. They're now up to about 6.5%. Some polls showing them as high as 9%. Some people are saying 10% could be their ceiling, which would be interesting, because they then wouldn't be very far behind the Greens. But yeah, I do think Die Linke will probably get above a 5% threshold. I wouldn't guarantee it. Speaking of that threshold, the Free Democrats are somewhat closing in on it. This is our highest polling number since I started tracking in September last year, so they're at 4.22%. Meanwhile, what are all the parties looking like? Well, the Union parties are just below 30%, AFD hovering right around 20%, which they have been for a couple of months now, and then you have Social Democrats and Greens hovering more or less where they have been for the last 3 months or so. So looking at the seat count, the biggest change here is Bundeswahlknecht not winning any seats, while Die Linke does win seats. The Greens down a bit, Social Democrats down a bit, Union equal, and AFD down a bit. We see that Die Linke is doing better than what Bundeswahlknecht was doing last month. So all those losses from parties do seem to go to the left. So let's look at what coalitions could be made. Union and Social Democrats, so a grand coalition, looks that is what most people seem to want from surveys, should work reasonably easily. That's about just 9 seats over a majority. I must also stress that for complicated reasons, there's usually more than the planned 630 seats, but since they are all proportional, we can just use this sort of arithmetic anyway to guess whether coalitions will get a majority or not. Union and Alternative for Germany has for a long time been the largest coalition of 2 parties, although there's questions as to whether they'd want to work together. Meanwhile, Union and Greens also looking possible, and meanwhile the so-called Kenya coalition of Union, Social Democrats and Greens would be very strong. It's the biggest coalition I have tracking here. Then of course I have been tracking a broad centre-left coalition of Social Democrat, the Greens, Bundeswahlknecht and Die Linke, and that gets to about 257. So unless there's a big polling error, I don't see that sort of coalition being viable. Even if it does have a seat number, I do not think that they would get along too well. So here's my tracking of a vote. You can see that Die Linke goes from essentially last of the nationwide parties to going up into 5th. Free Democrats, of course, getting closer to 5%, and Bundeswahlknecht just dipping below. And seats, I don't know why the line for Die Linke looks like that. It should be maroon. Can I make it maroon? I'm gonna make it maroon. Yep. Maroon. No, now it looks like the other one. I'll make it like a dark red. Yeah, there you go. That's good. That's much better. Yeah, so I expected to get nearly 50 seats, but I will also be making a prediction. Now, this is not on what I said on the community pages. If you know what I'm talking about, then you know what I mean. That'll be in a separate video later. This is my personal predictions. I do think that in this case, we will see Bundesrepublik break the 5% margin. I think Die Linke will get a result reflected in most recent polls. I get 9%. We've seen a general boost for the centre-left recently. I think the Greens and Social Democrats have both got 14 and 16.5% respectively in polls. I think they can do that. I think Südschleswig will not get free constituencies, and they certainly will not get 5% of a vote. So I think they will exit Parliament. The Free Democrats honestly have been on a downward trajectory in the last couple of weeks. Early on in the month, they were having some polls where they got above 5%. That's been falling down. We can maybe increase that to maybe about 4.5%. That's most I'm willing to really push it. There's a chance they get above 5%. Then we can start talking about coalitions. But the Unions Party, I think 29% is about what's expected. We've seen some enthusiasm has started to leave the campaign, but not enough that I think it would result in too big of a vote downturn. And AFD, 19.5%, which I know doesn't really make sense from a lot of the polls, but we have seen generally with far-right parties, we've seen it in France, we've seen it in Poland, we've seen it in quite a few places. They tend to lose a couple of percentage points on election day as compared to the polls. So let's look at what my prediction for seats and coalitions are. So I have Bundesrepublik returning to the parliament with just 2 less seats than in January. I do think Die Linke goes up to 60. I think the Greens fall back 1 to 94. I think Social Democrats fall back 3 to 111. I think Unions Party, this is by far the worst result for them in my predictions, in my polling, going down to 196, and AFD going down to 132. So overall, what do you need for a coalition? Well, Union and Social Democrat, you need 316 in my prediction for a coalition. They're not getting that. So I'm actually going to say no for first time in the tracking of these coalitions. That doesn't work. Let me just remove the green and red signify green. I do think that coalition would be feasible, and red, I do not think that coalition would be feasible. So then you have Union and Alternative for Germany, which is 328, which is a majority, but it might not be enough on election day if I am over predicting the general right-wing turnout. You have Union and the Greens. I do not think they get a majority at this point. So that is also a very interesting thing to talk about. They're about 25 seats behind that majority. So then you really only have 2 options for Union. They work with Alternative for Germany, which they really won't want to, or they can work with Social Democrats and Greens, which gets to 401, which is a pretty comfortable total. I think that is the most likely. That is the so-called Kenya coalition, because the green, red, and black, which are the colours of the Kenyan flag. So the question is there any opposition to the Kenya coalition, or perhaps black and blue? Well, yes. This alliance of Social Democrats, Greens, Bundesrepublik and Die Linke, while not very feasible working together, may still happen if they want to go with a generally left-wing economic platform. I still have them not being able to get that number, but they're only down by 14 as opposed to down by 50, 60 as I was thinking before. So overall, I think that's possible. My predictions and raw vote totals, we see basically AFD and CDU going down, everything else going up, and I do predict that both left-wing parties, that being Die Linke and Bundesrepublik, will get seats. Of course, I could be over predicting or under predicting everything. All will be revealed when the results come in. I'll try make a video in the next day or two or so once there are votes coming in as to what I think is going to happen. Thank you for joining.